throughout your career and all the different leadership that you encounter, yes, always look to the good ones to model yourself after, but the bad ones are the ones that you need to remember.
Good afternoon. This is Eric Leclerc, and we are representing Push Press, and we are continuing our series with In the Trenches. And originally, the series was designed around the entrepreneurial space of gym owners or general managers of gyms. And we were looking at the traits and characteristics of leadership into the pandemic, through the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course, leading your staff and your community out. And so we've expanded not just our audience, we've also expanded the individuals with which we care to bring on and share with you. And so today, I've got someone on the podcast. We've actually never had a chance to meet, but we've been following along both her professional career, her military career, and we've traveled in so many circles. I feel as though man, she feels like a sister to me. We've got to hang out. We've missed hanging out by one weekend. She was actually up here shooting at Burrow Canyon with the Risen Warrior team. And I thought, that's the day. I just can't go. I was actually with my daughter, and I missed. But we will connect. We will definitely connect. But I'm super humbled to have Nikki on today. So Nikki, for those of you that may not know who you are, let's hear about you. Who are you?
Well, first of all, I'm humbled to be on your podcast and for you to ask me. So thank you for that.
Right on.
Who am I? I am just a lady who I recently retired from the Navy last March. I did almost 24 years in the Navy. Started out enlisted for 10 years. I was a search and rescue corpsman, and then I transitioned using an officer program within the Navy and got my commissioned in the nurse corps.
Okay.
So the last almost 14 years of my career I spent in the nurse corps, just doing all kinds of things. I was with the Marines, I was on a ship, I've deployed, I flew, and my whole career mostly is revolved around helicopters.
Okay.
Not really, it's kind of by chance, but I loved it. I love everything about flying, and I still continue to fly with the San Bernardino Sheriffs. They have an air rescue program that I volunteer for, so I get to continue flying with them and doing search and rescue. And yeah,
I love it.
Involved in all kinds of different things now. I'm busier now in retirement than I think I was when I was working. So
I know that feeling. Well, so in the Army, our programs for enlisted to officer are called green to gold. And that takes into consideration time spent on the enlisted side. And then of course, transition, commission, and program. Did you know you wanted to commission early on as an enlisted, or no? How did that come about?
So I joined the Navy because I was one of those that was sort of lost in high school and didn't have much direction. I spent most of my childhood playing tennis, and I thought, with my dad spending so much money on that, at least it would get me to college. And then somewhere within high school, I kind of lost my way a little bit and just sort of dropped everything I was doing, and then found myself my senior year with no real plan. And my dad basically saying, figure it out because you're out when you're 18. So, my brother had joined the Navy before me, so I was like, guess I'll go to the recruiter and check it out. So my intention was just to join and enlist for one enlistment, and then, do the whole college fund and get out and figure it out from there. And it just kept going. I mean, I found myself interested in all kinds of different things. The search and rescue thing was one thing. This was during the 90s. And so there were no females at the time doing it. I think there was one or two before me, but at the time that I went to apply, there weren't any females. So my career counselor had said that I couldn't apply for it because no females were in it, which to me was,
Yep.
Having no females in the community and females not allowed are two different things, right? And so
Right.
I challenged that, and because I was like, it's search and rescue. I don't understand why females wouldn't be able to do that. It's not combat related.
Right.
And so I made her go and check out, look at the instruction again and read it. And so that's actually one of my little pearls to people, because I was very junior at the time and she was senior and she was a career counselor and she should have known, what she was talking about. I could have taken her answer, that I couldn't join, and just, I would have a completely different life right now. But I challenged her and I said, well, I'd like to see that in writing because it doesn't make sense to me. And she went back and looked it up and came back and said, well, it doesn't say you can't, so I guess you go ahead. So ended up getting accepted into that community, and it just kept going from there. So I feel like every enlistment that I did, it was like, this is the last one. I'm just going to do one more. 24 years later.
More.
Yeah.
So the transition, and for those that are watching that don't know, I mean, there's culturally the enlisted side and the commission side, or the officer side, those worlds are not the same. I mean, not only from a requirement or an academic requirement and or time served, but the roles are different, obviously. Did you have officers that you looked up to, or characteristics of those officers that you looked up to that you were like, dang, one day I want to prove to them or be like them, or, grow up like them? Anyone that stands out?
So I'll tell you, most of the leaders that I looked up to were senior enlisted leaders, because they just, not all of them were great, but.
Whoops, I shouldn't say that.
What'd you say?
I said as they should be.
Yes. No, it's true though. And, again, I can't speak for all senior enlisted, but I did have a few that I definitely looked up to and wanted to or aspired to be like. I always say that, throughout your career and all the different leadership that you encounter, yes, always look to the good ones to model yourself after, but the bad ones are the ones that you need to remember, and more so remember not to be like. And
Sure.
one that sticks out in my mind, so it's kind of opposite of what you're asking me, but when I reported to my first duty station as a search and rescue corpsman, the officer in charge sat me down and said, I don't think females should be out there doing this job, so I'm not going to let you.
Whoa.
Yes.
Okay.
And this was all before we had the equal opportunity, officers and people, someone to go to in that circumstance.
There's nothing.
I did not know what to do at that point.
So what to fill that first station? What did you do?
So I walked out of there just in shock, because again, my officer in charge just told me that he didn't think females should be out there, and this is what I was there for. I had to start training or I was going to lose that job opportunity. And so I had a great senior enlisted leader at my last command. And I remember him saying, if you need anything or if you run into any issues, go ahead and call me. And so he's my master chief. So I called him and I said, listen, this is the situation, and I really have no idea what to do. And luckily he knew my senior enlisted, the advisor for that community, and he reached out to him, because I didn't even know at that point that I had one of those. And so he reached out to him, and then they got the ball moving with, them calling my command and the whole bit. And the guy was forced to let me go train. He did not make it easy on me though. He made me, so it was me and two other guys that were at that duty station for that particular job. And, I was the only one that had to work inside the branch medical clinic. I ran the immunizations department, and I had to stand EMT duty on the side along with trying to train. The two guys didn't have to do any of that. So
you're like, this doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah. But, and I've always been, I really try not to be one of those complainers, and yeah, it was completely unfair. But it just made me stronger. I put my head down and I was like, all right, you want to challenge me? Like, I do better with challenges anyway. So
I can tell.
Yeah, it just really motivated me to be better and do better. But also I remembered, I never want to be that type of leader. So that stuck with me a lot.
So from the officer side, at what point did you think to yourself, the enlisted side is done, I've got an opportunity, let's transition?
So as much as I loved being part of the search and rescue community, the unfortunate part with especially medical and the enlisted guys is that there's not much translation into the civilian sector with the certifications because
Yeah.
the military doesn't offer many certifications, right? Or official licensing. So I knew at that point, if I wanted to get out at some point, I didn't really have anywhere to go, because in my community, in the civilian sector, it is, police or firefighters that do that type of job, and I'd have to start all over again. So I sat there and thought about it. Everyone's like, "Oh, did you always know you wanted to be a nurse?" And I was like, "No." It just seemed like the right progression for me at the time, because I was in the medical field, and there was a commissioning program that was for the nurse corps, that was specifically for the nurse corps, and it's kind of what I knew. So I just went for it, and I threw in an application and got accepted to it. So
Outstanding. Now, so you enlisted obviously in the 90s, right? 90 when? Like 90. Say that again, I'm sorry?
95.
Okay, awesome. We have the exact same enlistment date, by the way, 95. So when did you transition back to school, and then when was that, the commission? Like early 2000s? Was that post 9/11?
Yes. So I got accepted into the program 2004, and I started school. And the way that program worked is I stayed on active duty. I just PCS to the school. And so
Right.
my job for the next 2.5 years was just to go to school, which is a great program. And I always say, for all the guys that are in the military, take advantage of these programs, because, who's going to pay you just to go to school at this point? So it's 2004, and then 2006 I graduated, and then I received my commission.
Oh, okay. Now, from that role, what changed in you personally? You went from enlisted, which has a mission and a purpose and a direction, now commissioned as an officer, totally different role.
Yeah.
What?
So I don't know how many times in my first year or two I was told to take my enlisted hat off when I was an officer, because
I
it was,
bet.
yeah, it was a difficult transition for me, because, and the nurse corps is unique in the sense that I worked hand in hand with my corpsmen in the hospital. So I was a junior officer, and I was on a ward, and you had corpsmen that were assigned with you, and you're both kind of in junior roles, in different perspectives, but you're still both junior, and you had to work together to accomplish what you needed to do for the day. So it was a really unique situation, as far as, it wasn't that traditional, you're an officer, you're in charge of this many people. It was more so like you're in the trenches as well, and you're junior, and, so you had to, like, it was a very fine line of, still being an officer, but also being the same as the corpsman that you're working with, if that makes any sense.
Right. No, that totally.
I'm sorry.
When did that change?
I would say that changed when I became an 03, because I started to have a little bit more responsibility. You become a charge nurse and that type of thing.
Right.
So it changed, but I still would trend towards the enlisted, because that's where my heart was, and that's who I related with and who I got along better with. Some officers can be a little stuffy, and for me, it was just I like to work, and I like to get dirty, and not the manager role, or being in charge was never my thing.
Yeah.
I mean, my personality is more, I like to sort of, be quiet and observe, and then I step in when I need to, I guess, type of thing. So
That makes perfect sense. I mean, there's a handful of folks that I think, at least on my side, they made E6 or E5 and E6, and they moved off and green to gold, and you see them a couple years later, and you still know them. You still know, like, you grew up with them, and you still know them. And it's almost like those were, by the way, I will say, there's some of the best captains, some of the best majors, all had previous enlisted experience. They connected with the enlisted guys way better. The inspiration was way better. The motivation, of course, was way better. And the respect was almost, if you had to pick two, or if you had to pick from two, you knew exactly where most guys would follow. And that was always prior service enlisted, almost always.
Yeah, I agree with you. Mustang officers is what they're called. I've noticed, though, some of the worst officers are also Mustang officers as well. So I find that people who transition from enlisted to officer, they're either, like you say, what you just explained, or they get that power trip. and it's like, oh, now I have rank.
Matters, right?
Yeah, and they just go off on this power trip, and they're terrible. And I've encountered quite a few of those as well. And the guy who told me that I couldn't go train was a Mustang officer.
Of course, of course.
Yeah, so
How did the role from now school into training, how did that help on deployments? Or maybe it didn't, I don't know.
So again, medical is very unique. Being a staff officer, you don't get the same kind of training that the line officers get, I don't feel, especially in preparation for deployments. When we're in garrison, we're at hospitals for the most part. And, in a hospital environment, the military treatment facilities are a lot like the civilian facilities. You're going to work, you're working shifts. It's very similar, right? We don't do a lot of preparation for the military side of things as far as deploying. So a lot of medical people had a hard time initially in OIF and OEF because they're being plucked out of this environment, in garrison that's very civilianized, and then thrown into this war zone, and then expected to do their job, with very limited resources and a very an environment that they're not used to. And so, to me, I've always said it's no different than, going down to your local hospital and going, hey, nurse, doctor, you're going to go to Afghanistan now, because we just weren't afforded those training opportunities early on to understand what kind of environment or unique environment we were going to be in overseas. So as far as preparation goes, I felt like, especially going to Afghanistan, I was just kind of like thrown into it. And, I was with the Marines, and we were a damage control surgery unit. You kind of got there and we're like, okay, what do I do? You just have to go. So yeah, not a lot of preparation. And that's been kind of one of my staples too when I came back, is like, this is not okay, because I was flying very critical patients in Blackhawks, without being trained to do that, really. So I came back with that and said, I will never put anybody through that without the proper training, without preparing them, knowing what equipment they need, the skill set, all of it. So, yeah.
Were you able to come back and help make a change in not legislation, but in like SOPs? I'm trying to think like what would make sense for our audience to like. Were you able to come back and say, look at, these were from your AARs or whatever, this is what I observed, this is what we learned, these were our deficiencies. If we're going back again, this is what has to change. Were you able to help do that as an officer?
Yeah, so when I came back, I was very outspoken about that experience, and just that it just wasn't right, to throw people into these situations without the proper training and experience. We call it en route care, which is the critical care transfer part of, the theater out there, which is, it's kind of hard to explain if you don't know it, but I was in what was called a Role 2. So being part of a damage control, resuscitation, surgery unit, we're kind of out there, we're set up in tents, and we're there just to resuscitate the injured. And we try to get as close as we possibly can to where, known operations are going to be, or where there are expected casualties.
To minimize the travel time?
To minimize travel time. And, if the bleeding, because what do these guys die of out there on the battlefield? Mostly it's hemorrhaging, right? So the whole goal is to stop the bleeding, give them back the blood, and get them to a higher level of care. And so, a lot of times you can't control the bleeding just with tourniquets or whatever, especially if it's, in the chest and abdominal area. So we were out there to perform surgery, to stop the bleeding if we had to. And then we would package them up, and then we'd throw them on a helicopter. And at the time so we had the Army dust off units that were doing most of those intra-theater transports. The medics on those birds weren't trained in critical care. So they were experts at that point of injury, right? So they would come into those areas, they'd pick people up, they would, take them on their way, control airway, control bleeding with tourniquets, whatever. But where we were unique is that when our patients came out of surgery, or the damage control surgery, they were now on a ventilator and they were on blood and drips, and those medics weren't trained at the time. They are now
systems.
Right. So I remember my first patient, or the first patient we had, the medic came in and saw all of this equipment and was like, I don't do that. So my doctor was like, hey, get on the bird and transfer the patient. And I was like, well, I don't do that. So
yeah. You're
like,
who's gonna...
yeah. So it was very, it was night too on top of it. So I'm getting thrown into this bird. This guy still needs resuscitation. So I'm still resuscitating him in the back of the helicopter. The medic was like, I don't do this. I'm sorry. I can't really help you. I have no communication with them because they didn't bring me any ears. They didn't bring me any flight gear. I wasn't supposed to be flying. So,
unreal.
Seeing this patient by myself in the back of a dark bird, freaking out internally. I mean, I kept my composure, got the guy to where he needed to go. The helicopter left me there.
You're like,
yeah. As I was giving a report to the trauma team, you hear the helicopter fly away, and the surgeon was like, was that your ride? I was like,
you're like, unbelievable.
So now I'm in, some fob in Afghanistan. I don't even really know where I'm at, and I don't even know how to contact my unit to get back to them. So yeah, it was, I just remember sitting there, and at that point, I think it was like 2 a.m. I'm like, this is bullshit. Like, I will never put anybody through this shit again. So
yep. I
came back. I ended up doing a bunch of medevacs during that time. I was there for 9 months, and came back and said, I'm gonna do something about this. If big Navy, big Marine Corps won't do anything, I'm gonna do something, because I refuse to send medics, nurses out there with no training in that area. So my last duty station, I was stationed with a Marine Medical Battalion up at Camp Pendleton, and my CO at the time was very, big into the whole en route care. They knew there were issues, and we had a lot of gaps there because the Navy does not have dedicated medevac. So like the Army, DSOF is dedicated medevac, right? The Air Force has their aviation AE teams, their flight nurses, and whole teams that are involved with transporting patients. The Navy doesn't have that. We do what's called a lift of opportunity. So we have no actual unit that's just dedicated to that. It's one of those things where we have personnel, but in order to get that mode of transportation, we have to ask, beg, borrow, and steal from the line side to get a bird to transport, do a medevac or anything like that. So with that being said, we don't have any schools for that, and then that's why we didn't really have training. There is a joint program called the Joint en route care course in Alabama, but it is for all services. It is directed towards that helicopter transfer, but we're constantly fighting for seats for that. So at the Med Battalion, my CO just said, do what you got to do to train these guys. And so I came up with a program to train Greenside, is what we call them with the Marine Corps, medics and nurses in that arena. And then I was involved in a lot of subcommittees and committees to try to get things changed in that aspect.
For those of you guys that are watching at home, this is the absolute critical component of why Nikki's on today. Good men and women don't just sit by and watch. They initiate change. And that's huge. I mean, from let's say from an enlisted guy looking up at officers, watching those individuals recognize a problem and try to create solutions. Those are the men and women that we want to follow, plain and simple. So you saw the hole, you want to gap. I mean, literally and figuratively, you want to stop the bleeding. So how was that received? And obviously, what does it look like today? I mean, you've transitioned away from that unit, right? And so did you feel okay with what you achieved professionally in the military as you stepped aside?
So it was received, by the corpsmen, by the nurses very well, because everyone knew this was a gap. Everyone, if you asked any of these people who were in that role, a lot of them were scared because it's like, I'm not getting the proper training to do this job. So everybody was all for it in that aspect. People way above me were not very happy because
Sure.
It wasn't an official curriculum. And I understand it from their point of view is that we don't know what you're teaching. We don't know what you're doing. I just said it was sustainment training. That's what I call it to get away with it. But I did get, I had to talk to the deputy to the admiral of my community because she was like, what are you doing? You can't just create training or whatever. And I said, well, the problem is yes, we do have the official curriculum, that joint route care course, which is a great course. But again, we're very limited. We don't have seats there. We don't have dedicated seats. We don't have the money to send people. Our hands are tied and we still have deployments going on. So I'd asked her, I said, well, what would you like me to, would you like me to send people untrained or, would you like me to turn down deployments? Like, what do you want me to do? And it was just like, well, you're not supposed to be training them this way. And I said, okay, then what you're telling me is to send people unprepared and untrained downrange. And, and of course, it's all about how you pose the argument, right? How you debate with people. I posed that question knowing that she had no answer for that, or no good answer.
I don't know.
Yeah, and of course it was like, well, no, I don't want you to send people untrained. Of course you don't, so until you fix the bigger problem, I'm going to still train people that are tasked to go downrange. And, they went from there. So, yeah.
What?
But I understood the problem. The problem is that, what's that?
No, go ahead. I'll ask after. Go ahead.
The problem is that, and what everybody said is what happens when you leave. And because it's not official, because there, wasn't, I did try to make as much of a standard amongst, we have 3 battalions, which is 1st Med Battalion in Pendleton, and we had 2nd in Lejeune, and we have 3rd in Okinawa. So I reached out to all these folks and I tried to, I started a whole share group and we were teaching the same thing. So I tried to make it as standard as possible, but I did understand that once I left, if I didn't have people to, with the same kind of passion, knowledge and skills or whatever, even like the lessons learned that I had from deploying, then it probably would fall apart. And even though I passed it down to a lieutenant who's amazing and, is just as passionate, it's one of those, what happens when she leaves? And sure. I don't know. I'm sure the future of it is,
unknown at this point.
Yeah. So I get it from that standpoint. I thought it would motivate them to do something more with, having more of an official or standard curriculum for us, but that kind of got solved as well. So,
man, the effort was there, the intention was there, the motivation, the discipline, all of that. I mean, obviously the education was even there, and the end of the road impact it would have, was absolutely necessary. It's almost as if you're like, how can we continue to get this done?
Yeah.
But then you walk away, like you said, and kind of all hands off.
It is. I have managed to find my way back in to continue helping out. I'll be starting a new job in the next week that is working with my medical director who is just as passionate as I am. And we're going to be working on the committee together. So I haven't quite let it go.
Good.
So,
well, then walk me through, how did you end up obviously exiting or ETSing, getting out, moving back into the kind of civilian component? How did you hook up with San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department for volunteer rescue?
So I'm always one of those people, if I'm interested in something, I'm always looking for opportunity. That's another thing I tell people is that, don't talk about it, do it. I mean, if you want to do something, it's all out there for you to do it. Whatever it is, you just got to find it. You have to network with people and figure it out. So I wanted to fly in helicopters, and one, I was still in at the time. I love flying, and there isn't much flying opportunity when you're not deployed in the military. And so I also wanted to keep up my skill set. And, for me, if I'm training people, I want to be able to know what I'm talking about. So I need to continue and sustain my own skills, right?
Right.
So I had some friends over at the LA Sheriff's Department, Air 5, and they offered for me to come and ride along with them. So I was doing that. The problem with their flying with them is that they don't have a dedicated program for volunteers. So it was ride along whenever I could, or whenever they had a slot for me to come and ride along. But they also, they take other people from all around the county as well. So I'm kind of like, the last resort type of thing. So I wasn't getting as much opportunity as I wanted. So I started looking for other programs and stumbled across San Bernardino's program, which does have a dedicated team for volunteers for air rescue. So I'm an actual, citizen volunteer. I have a sheriff's card, the whole bit. So, and it's dedicated to where, I have to give a certain amount of time, to work on their team. And, the payoff is I get the training from them and I get to keep up my skill set in that area. So
love it. I love it. Yeah. We lucked out not only where we live now, but where we previously lived. Sierra Madre Search and Rescue is near and dear to my heart. They're actually a non-deputized, or one of the only non-deputized units, if not the only one. And so Air 5 was transport. And we would always laugh because the Bush team would go in to try to secure the whatever it was. And here comes 5 and always just beats the ground team right to it. But now in San Dimas, we're right next to San Dimas Mountain Rescue.
okay.
And it's a great group, totally rad. I mean, so for LA County, right, it's probably, it might be different than San Bernardino, but in order to volunteer, you've got to deputize, so you would have to go to the Reserve Academy. Did San Bernardino require you to go to the Reserve Academy also?
It's an option. So if
Okay.
I want to, I can go to the Reserve Academy and then I can become a full deputy.
Reserve, yep.
Yeah, a reserve deputy. I just, I haven't ventured into that yet just because I have a million things going on. So
You kind of got stuff going on.
a little bit. Yeah. I blame it on my personality, but yes.
All over.
Yeah.
Tell me real quick if we can, and if I mess the acronym up, you can laugh at me, but Global Surgical Medical Group, what is that?
Yes. So Global Surgical Medical Support Group, GSMSG. Yes. I linked up with them like 4 or 5 years ago. They are an organization. They're a nonprofit organization. It's medical. They are unique in international medicine compared to the others in the fact that they have surgeons. They have full-on surgical capability. So they provide a skill set that most can't in those areas. And so right now we're doing stuff in northern Iraq with the Kurdish and teaching them, TCCC, advanced medical, life support type of concepts and skills. And then the teams will also go into the local university up there and, train their surgeons and nurses. So it's a great group of people. While I was I couldn't do any of the deployments, obviously, because military is not too keen on you, taking a vacation to Iraq without being with them. So I had to wait until I retired and did a trip with them last October.
I love it. I totally love it. So, I mean, you talk about, you actually just used TCCC. A lot of guys that end up getting out from the active component, they go into like the personal instruction route, whether you're looking at the everyday carry. We look at friends like, Lucas and the guys up at Risen Warrior, and they talk a lot about, shooting and tactics and mindset and, the everyday, piece. But from a medical standpoint, do you teach? Are you on any course that folks could learn from you?
Yeah, so I am still part of the instructor cadre with a company called Ragged Edge Solutions, and they do prolonged field care training out of North Carolina, and it's really, the audience is mostly soft medics or soft units, and the idea behind that is the soft guys are operating in areas that aren't easy to get to these days. So unlike Afghanistan and Iraq, where, you called for a medevac, you're probably getting one within 15 to 30 minutes, they're now in areas of operations that are very large, like Asia, Africa, that type of thing. So what happens is if they have someone who's injured, they're going to have to sit on them for, the training is designed for up to 3 days, but it could be longer than that, it could be shorter than that. But if they have a critically ill patient, then they need to, or injured patient, then they need to be able to sustain their care. Which at that point, so now you're getting away from that initial TCCC, mind frame and going into more of a nursing mind frame. And so I've been asked to go out there and teach those guys more of the nursing concepts of, the things that you don't think about when you're a medic used to just doing like the point of injury stuff and getting them on a bird and out of the way. Basic human stuff, like they gotta pee, they gotta go to the bath, they have to eat, they have to be rotated, the medications to sustain their life or whatever. So I teach doing that. I teach in Iraq when I go with them. That was all teaching advanced life support skills to the Kurdish. I'm ACLS instructor, so yeah, I still try to teach when I can.
I love it. I love that you consistently give back all the knowledge that you've absorbed, all the scenarios, all the travel, the deployments, all of it. You're a conduit for education. It's going to pay down the road. If you've not already, you will save lives. Period. I mean, I know you have, but for those that are under your tutelage or will down the road take classes and courses from you, that's impressive. Not a lot of folks care to give back, and I've seen that. There's a ton of knowledge out there, and I'm really glad to see you still on the forefront delivering that.
Thank you. I mean, my biggest thing is the lessons learned, right? Because these guys don't know any lessons learned. They haven't been deployed yet or whatever the case may be. So I'm really big on like, hey, I made a mistake here, so don't do it. This is where I messed up. So
all my errors.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, for the audience that's watching and maybe inspired by what you've shared and your journey and everything that you've earned, definitely through your life and life experiences, any pearls of wisdom, any little tidbits, any walkaways that you can share with them that can maybe help illuminate their path going forward?
Like I said, is if you're going to talk about something, then do it. I have so many people ask me like, how are you doing all of this? Or, because I've jumped out of airplanes, which I was terrified to do before. I've flown helicopters. It was just, I'm shooting long range rifles. I think about something, I want to do it, and I seek it out and I find it. If you're going to talk about it, then do it. Anyone can, I'm very average. So if I can do it, anybody else can do it. And that's,
I think you're very average. No.
No, but I really am. I'm just a nurse. I'm a girl. I'm not like the strongest person. I'm not the fastest for sure. But I'm a lifelong learner, and if you don't approach life, wanting to learn something every day, then, I kind of think you're in the wrong, or, you got to be open to learning from anyone, anything,
any experience. Yeah.
Great. So yeah, I mean, it's, finding new things to get involved with. One of the other foundations that I work with, Hunter 7 Foundation, I don't know if you're familiar with them or have seen them, but
yep.
This is a foundation with, a small group of people who are focusing on the effects of the burn pits, so it's a very small group of individuals tackling a very large issue.
Yep.
That nobody else is really talking about. So, but I've seen it just in my career, people coming back with all kinds of weird cancers and respiratory illnesses and things like that. And, that can be attributed to being exposed to these burn pits. And, if you're ever deployed, you probably remember like a big waft of black air coming into your camp. So
I definitely have praise and thanks for folks that have come home and have raised the flag like, hey, there are problems that if we don't address are never going to be corrected. They're never going to be exposed. And those that are suffering as they transition back into the civilian component, they're, struggling. So,
well, I mean, that's a huge issue. It's one issue that affects all of us veterans, right? Who've deployed downrange, every one of us. And because it's such a, cancers are very, slow moving, or these respiratory illnesses, it's not a traumatic injury that you can put your finger on and say, yes, you were injured here at this place at this time.
Right.
So these guys later in life, when they get sick, aren't getting the support that they need from the VA or whatever, because, it's one of those things that is difficult to prove, right? So, having these people who are working themselves and doing this on the side and doing research and everything else, again, it's that like-minded people that I try to stick with, and people that don't have to do any of this but are passionate about whatever topic for whatever reason. So they're a great group.
that's a tremendous, it needs to happen more. Let's just say that, plain and simple. And well, I sincerely appreciate your time. And I really think this is going to hit a lot of folks, and you're going to be able to take away a lot of good concepts from it. From my heart to your heart, obviously, for you continuing to do what you do today. Thank you. I sincerely appreciate your time.
No, thank you for having me.